Huh. This is from Gideon Hull's sermon. This is a portion of the sermon. And this is something that really alarmed me. And the reason this really alarmed me is because this is something that really plagued a lot of people that I knew, including my own family, my own life. So this is from Gideon Hull actually says this in his sermon from 2631 to 2740. He says, the truth is, modern thinking and technology have kind of allowed us to grow in our sin, right? It kind of disguises our sin, okay? And even though illness, now don't get me wrong, there are some physical and mental illnesses that are really real and need to be taken very seriously, but the world today will use something just as simple as an illness. Now, who's the world today? Who is this? Notice how broad brushing that is, okay? It's just a generalization. Can you give me an example, please? Let's have an example, please. Says, now don't get me wrong, there's some that are really real and need to be taken very seriously. Like, says who? But the world today will use something just as simple as an illness to kind of camouflage what's going on in our hearts, right? Doc, I'm so depressed. I've done all these bad things and I don't even know how to handle them. That's okay, man. Take these pills. Here's a prescription. They're going to help you. You see how generalizing that is and how much that glosses over some very serious things. Okay. Now, and he says, this is back to Gideon. Well, this is still Gideon, but, back to it. He says, our world wants a prescription right now. What our world wants a prescription. Let's see how general that is. See how using and theming that is, and not a specific example. Using and theming, and then just putting this desire, like they want something. Have you talked to them all? Our world wants a prescription right now. They don't want a description, by the way. And that made me, obviously, stuff like this is descriptive theology, whereas some of the best theology is apophatic, not cataphatic, meaning it's statements about what God is not and about things we can't know, rather than describing things we think we can know, which when you base your theology on what you think you can describe and you've described all the things, you're basically playing Dungeons and Dragons with things you've never seen and can't possibly understand and feel before. They don't want a description. Okay, they want to prescribe, but they don't want to describe. Like describing. That's the problem. The left hemisphere thinks that the virtual reality of Calvinism, the thinking that you can have an accurate description rather than having higher ignorance and the wisdom of not knowing, is one of the illnesses here. And the diagnosis is that we're getting morally better. The problem is we're getting morally worse. Man didn't start at the bottom of the moral ladder. They started at the top, then they fell. So let me ask you a question. This kid's a 20-something. I don't know. I don't know how old he is. I'm guessing he's around 22 or 23, maybe, right? And I think he got his undergrad degree and he maybe has undergone a year or two of seminary at this point. He moved off. I think the sermon was 2 weeks ago or 2 or 3 weeks ago, because when I first saw it on YouTube, it was 2 weeks ago, but it's taken me like a week and a half or something like that, about a week to prepare this. So it hasn't been long. It hasn't been long since he preached this. So I'm 22, 23, 24 maybe. He talks in the sermon about going to get married, which he hasn't done yet. And as far as that's concerned, good luck. I really wish you well. Hope that goes well. And I don't think it's going to, at least in the long run, because you're not a real boy yet. You're still an ideologue. You're Pinocchio, and you're braying like a donkey. You can't even talk. All you can say is Calvinism. You don't even know what you think. And when you're saying something that you can't possibly verify through your own experience or through your own ability to see, your nose might as well be growing. It's the same thing as a lie. I would highly recommend not getting married before you become a real boy, because you got heartache coming your way before you become a real boy. Wait till you become a real boy, then get married. So I asked ChatGPT, I said, ChatGPT, Gideon Hull has no advanced degrees or any formal training in psychology. He's a theology student, which is an impediment, it's a handicap to knowing anything real. It's like going to learn about Dungeons and Dragons and then trying to be a mechanic somewhere. It doesn't work that way. But he says this in the transcript, and then I pasted what the transcript says in ChatGPT. The same thing that I just showed you previous slide here. I pasted it right here. Let me bring up the pen. Not my pen yet. That's why it advanced. So I pasted that portion. I pasted that right there in the chat. And I said, what are the dangers or implications of an unqualified person making authoritative statements about serious conditions such as depression and reducing it all down to a moral issue about sin rather than referring people to qualified experts? How might this be misleading or damaging to those who look at him as religious authority? Now, what I was taught in the independent Baptist realm was that the entire field of psychology was man's attempt to find clever, educated reasons to excuse their sinfulness. That's what I was taught. I was actually taught that. It's just, we're just trying, the real problem is sin, and that's just man trying to seek excuses for why he's not responsible for his own sin. That's what we were taught about psychology, and not just at one church. I mean, it was like the whole thing. That was the attitude towards psychology. And then my wife, Paula, she grew up not in Indianatown. Not grew up, but in her early 20s, they became very active in the Assemblies of God. And they were very much against psychology and therapy from their viewpoint as well. And to the point where they would take the word therapist and separate therapist into the rapist. And they actually taught their people that you're getting spiritually and mentally raped by these people when you go to them, and to stay away from them because they're dangerous. And this mindset, the same mindset that's coming from young Gideon here, is the same kind of mindset that I grew up with, is that going, like, pursuing or exploring the realm of psychology at all, which all it is the study of the mind. That's all psychology is. Exploring that realm at all was just an attempt to run from God like Jonah did, cover up your sin under a bunch of, clever reasons where you can blame everybody else for your sin. And psychology was just a big field of man trying to blame everybody else except for himself for his own sin, and not take responsibility for his own sin. That's what psychology was to us. Yay, independent Baptists. That's all we knew. So I asked ChatGPT, what's the danger when an unqualified person makes authoritative statements about serious conditions such as depression and reduces it to a moral issue about sin? It can have several dangerous and damaging implications. There can be a misunderstanding of depression and what it is, stigmatization. Now, people in the church who actually are depressed and actually are suffering from it, there's multiple different kinds of depression and multiple different kinds of real kinds of depression, okay? If they are suffering from depression, they may now be afraid to say something in that church because now there's a stigma, because I'm just using my depression because I just want a prescription instead of a description. Clever. It would discourage people from getting professional help. It would deter people from seeking professional treatment. Now I'm less virtuous because, people have been told if you go to a psychologist instead of the altar after church, you're not trusting God with your problems. You're trying to put your problems in the hands of man. The Bible says, put not your trust in the strength of men. Yeah, that's how it goes. So then you get inadequate treatment. Then you have potential harm to your mental health. You have worsening mental health. You have increased isolation away from people. You have a loss of credibility. What else would happen? Erosion of trust in religious authorities. They would lose credibility. There's all kinds of people right now who know that religious speakers are a bunch of bunk. I mean, just look at, Derek Webb, Josh Harris, Paul Maxwell, Megan Phelps, uh, Abraham Piper, Matt Slick's kids. Okay, they know that religious speakers, stage 3, game A, fundamentalists, evangelicals are a bunch of bunk. They know it's a bunch of bunk. And while I'm not an atheist, I join the atheists in the rejection of that religion and that God, because that's not the God of the Bible. So there's a responsibility, care component. There's moral and ethical concerns. What are the ethical implications of standing in front of somebody as a spiritual authority and making statements about mental health about which you are not qualified to make? Do not do that. If you're listening to this, young Gideon, stop doing that. Don't do that anymore. Of all things, do not venture into areas like this where you are dismissive. And I'm not saying don't explore them. I wholeheartedly endorse exploring into these domains with an explorative and discerning mind. Now, we do it on this channel. We recommend that people explore and study these things out, and we report our findings on this channel. But we do not stand as an authority and reductively dismiss an entire field down to a moral issue of people trying to escape their sin. You see, we don't do that. So yeah, explore it, learn about it, report your findings, but don't come at it moralistically, dismissively, and reductionistically, which is what you did. That's very, very dangerous. And you won't know why it's dangerous for about 25 years. And by then you will have a wake of destruction in your path that you cannot undo. So please listen to me now. I know what I'm talking about.